Everybody ready to get started? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get ready to begin. I'd like to call to order the November 21st, 2022 regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. If everyone could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone joining us this evening and everyone viewing remotely. I'd like to announce the board held an executive session November 7th regarding negotiations and personnel, and November 14th regarding negotiations and student discipline. Board members with an agenda before you, are there any changes to the agenda? At this time then, I'd like to call on our board secretary for a roll call of board members present.
Dr. Anderson. Here. Dr. Bader.
Here.
Ms. Brandt.
Here.
Dr. Buck.
Here.
Ms. Concepcion.
Here.
Dr. Crevecore.
Here.
Dr. Duffy.
Here.
Ms. Huff.
Here.
Ms. Zidney. Here.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, is there a superintendent update then?
Yes, I would like to congratulate the State High Girls Cross Country team who recently finished second place in the 2022 PIAA Cross Country Championships. And kudos to the boys as well for their sixth place finish as well. So, thanks.
All right. Legislative update.
I don't have much to report. There was an election the last time we had a meeting, and the results of that have come through. In the Pennsylvania Senate, there were 25 seats up for election. 19 of the incumbents won who were running, and there are 4 Pennsylvania House members who moved to the Senate, and there are only 2 new members in the Senate. Likewise, in the House, there are 46 new members in the House who have never served in the House before. So 46 out of 203 new members. The Pennsylvania House has flipped to Democratic control. The Dems have named their leadership for the House and the Senate. The Republicans have named their leadership for the Senate, but not the House yet. However, today it broke that Carrie Benninghoff is not seeking leadership in the House. They will have I believe they're having a closed-door election tomorrow to determine their leadership.
Interesting.
So we'll see how this all shakes out.
Great, thank you. Carlene?
Yes, I'm sorry, for the superintendent update, could I just add a quick little thing for the boys cross country? They were seated 16th and they took 6, and that was so amazing. So
That's
I was
awesome.
gonna add that when I do my CAC, but I just needed to add that because that was very impressive.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's awesome. Thanks. All right, Gretchen and Peter, COG report?
I am going to hand that over to Peter because he attended the Parks Authority meeting that I was unable to attend, and also he has an update on the SBPA.
Yeah, so last week I attended a joint COG facilities, Parks Capital, and Park Authority meeting regarding the Whitehall Road Regional Park and its financing. The meeting was called to explain how contingency funding would be needed because of a set of change orders. The park was, and the park's finances were initiated a number of years ago. There have been debt negotiations and then refinancing over the last several years. And the contingency funds that were to deal with change orders, all kinds of things that could happen, only $75,000 was put aside for a project that is much, 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 much bigger than that. And the recommendation originally was something like 10 times that to deal with the changes. And that financing had not been put aside. So the meeting was nominally to have this group of committees, this pair of committees from the COG, the Council of Governments, and the Park Authority to move forward to the general forum, well, actually to the executive committee, to then go to the general forum, $578,000 that would be contingency for the future. Between in the last couple of months, change orders, which members of this board are very familiar with because of the State High project and the other 3 building projects, et cetera, those happen. Those were not accounted for, and they appeared. And there are about $260,000 or so worth of them, but no system and a contingency fund to pay for them. So to deal with them, this would have to be approved. There was a vote 17-1. So there are 6 people on the authority. SCASD is one of the reps to the authority board. And SCASD can vote. We are a voting member. And then the municipalities and the COG have representation on the other 2 committees, the Facilities Committee and the Parks Capital Committee. And so there was a 6-0 and a 5-1 vote on the other, with Ferguson Township having one vote against. This was one of the most rancorous meetings I've been to in some time. And I will also note that the Center Region Park and Rec Authority director very abruptly resigned a couple of weeks ago, and there was no mention of that in the meeting. The project manager for the park resigned just last week for the 2nd time, citing serious management issues. I'm not in the COG anymore. This is so it's a little bit distressing. This is a park that's been around for quite some time. There's broad public support. There would be fields that our kids would go play on. I think it's one of the reasons that we're on the Park Authority board. And so it's been very, very difficult. And there's a COG General Forum meeting coming up where that contingency funding is going to be voted on, it's my understanding, by the General Forum because of that vote that we just did.
Can I just add one thing
Yeah.
to that? Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think it's very important that Peter just gave that update because within SCASD, of course, as he just mentioned, we have K through 12 kids, students, who would, if this park comes to fruition, use these rectangular fields probably more than any other demographic
Oh, easily.
in the SCASD geographic area. And so it's important that he gave this update because then the families can know, SCASD families can know what's going on with this park or may not be going on with this park, as the case may be, and to be aware and participate in your local government political process should these rectangular fields be important to you or your kids. So anyway, okay, sorry, I interrupted.
Already been a great deal of taxpayer dollars gone into this park.
And
That's correct.
Wasn't there also supposed to be a multi-accessible playground as part of that, or was
The-
that in the first phase or
The playground is in I believe that's still in phase 1. There's also all these things that have happened with changes in the phasing because as they encountered this problem and that problem, I mean, and we all
Right.
know that this happens with construction projects, but yeah, it is hard to follow.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the multi-accessible playground because our community doesn't have that anywhere.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
and
mean, we have-
that
we
is
have-
in
we
the
have some
phase
stuff
one.
on SCASD playgrounds, but nothing like what is proposed.
Right, so if the funding doesn't come through, then we would also lose that. That is correct, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was quite a meeting. The other thing is the solar power purchase agreement working group. Today we interviewed the first firm, and there are 2 more interviews tomorrow. There will be a recommendation, a tentative recommendation forthcoming, and then I believe the final recommendation will come from the full working group December 14th.
No, thank you.
Yep.
Neil, is there any report from the student government perspective?
I guess accounting to like new things, not as of yet, but I do remember last time we did talk about like the mental health thing and the screening and
Yep.
I guess how that actions would be taken. So I guess things like that. Yeah.
So that's been a topic of discussion among
Yeah,
students.
definitely.
Good, thank you. And I had passed that on to Mr. Johnson as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other communication items from the board? All right. Then moving on to public comment. Each individual is limited to comments of up to 3 minutes for items related to board business that are not on the action items portion of the agenda. For action items, public comment is held just prior to voting on that item as required by school code. Is anyone here to make a public comment, or is anyone online who would like to make a public comment? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to routine approvals. If we could have a motion to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda.
So moved.
After the motion.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions on routine approvals?
I do. It's about the budget amendment. And I wasn't sure how 60,000 was the number, the budgeted amount, because being on the LAC meeting, it was supposed to be 65,648, giving us 10,656, not 60,000. So I'm not sure where 60,000, and I checked with Ben on that to make sure my numbers were correct. So I'm not sure where the discrepancy is.
Thank you, Donna.
So the budget, while 65,000, I think, was the 2021-22
Right.
award, when we do the budget each year, we don't always use that number because we don't know what's going to be allotted for sure. So the amount that we included in the budget was 60,000. That's been the common amount that we've budgeted for Perkins over the past few years.
Okay, I get it. So, because when we submit the Perkin grants and when we do how much money we think we may get, you have to use what we got last time. So I thought that you were also using what we had last time, which was the 65,000 instead of 60,000.
We use the 60,000, and then in the expenses that we budget are also 60, so that when we bring the budget amendment for the final amount, we adjust both the revenue and the expense.
I get it. I thought you were overestimating, and I thought you were.
Sure.
I get it now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? Is there any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Crevecoeur?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Huff?
Yes.
Ms. Zidney? Yes. Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Okay, those have passed. Moving on to action item A motion to approve an MOU with the State College Area Education Association attached in attachment 6A.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Okay, any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Crevecoeur?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Huff?
Yes.
Ms. Zidney? Yes. Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item B is a motion to approve the 2021-2022 audit statement, management discussion and analysis, shown in attachment 6B.
So moved.
That has been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes. Item C is a motion to approve an agreement with Power School for new human resource and finance system shown in attachment 6C.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Okay, Laurel?
I had sent in some questions about this because it is a new thing we've talked about for years. And I appreciate the thoroughness of the memo in terms of explaining different things that were looked at. And people responded to my questions about it, so
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Okay, that has passed. Item D is a motion to approve the purchase of fitness center bumper plate replacements in attachment 6D.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion?
These are always fun. I didn't know what a bumper plate was. Do the wonders of Google. I discovered what they are. And they have to do with weights. They have to do with the construction of the weights.
For barbells.
And barbells and
So
such.
that they
right?
don't,
Yeah,
so
right.
that if you drop it, that they're made of rubberized materials. so
Right.
that- Yeah.
Thank you. Exactly. That shows you how little I work out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Any other discussion? And any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item E is a motion to approve the Penn State affiliation agreement for kinesiology student interns shown in attachment 6E.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Okay, any public comment? Then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Okay, that has passed. Item F is a motion to approve payment to Vector Solutions for employee safety training and compliance for Act 44. This is shown in attachment 6F.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions and discussion? Public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. And item G is a motion to approve an open contract with Diane Hubona Coulter for the 2022-2023 school year, as shown in attachment 6G.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Laurel?
Just a quick one. I know we had done a couple of contracts with the same person earlier this year. Is this an addition, or does this encompass those?
Thanks, Danielle.
So it is encompassing those.
Okay.
It's a lot of PD to help grow the Solar School Complex.
Yeah.
They're doing the compliance and benefits of it. So when one school took part, other schools have contributed to, because it's embedding the revenue and stretching the analysis.
Okay. I just wasn't sure
Yeah, so we are.
what it was doing, but that sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. Any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. So moving on to info discussion, we're going to have a development update. This is shown in attachment 7A. We'll have Randy Brown at the table to provide us with this. In a recent finance committee meeting, we did have representatives from the State College School District Ed Foundation join us, and I'm the board liaison to that, if anybody has any questions. for me.
And their preliminary financial report and information is available on that Finance Committee agenda. If
Yes.
anybody is interested and hasn't reviewed that, they will have their formal annual report that they use to provide a report to you, the community, their donors. That is being developed now, as it typically is, and should be available in a short time period. I don't know the exact time frame, but very shortly. What I've shared with you tonight is the district's overall development update, which obviously does include the funding and fundraising efforts of the District Education Foundation, but then there are also endowments at the Center Foundation. We talk about the different sorts of the different types of funding that comes from the Center Foundation here. There's also the advertising sponsorships that our Assistant Athletic Director helps us to pursue, and then the various priorities that the district has committed to for the current school year, and then various other revenue summary from the foundation has been provided, and then I talk about the foundation report. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But we did go over this in Finance Committee as well.
Dan?
I have a quick question, Randy. This is a yes or no, almost a yes or no type of question. When we reorganized our relationship with the foundation within the last year and a half, we also, as a part of that, kind of also reorganized our relationship with the foundation officer, I thought.
The development officer?
Well, yeah, Paul Olivite, who became their employee, if you will. And in the memo,
Their contractor instead of our contractor.
right, exactly. Well, so to speak. So, there's a person identified in the memo as the district's foundation officer.
Yeah, it shouldn't say that.
Okay, just
Good
curious.
catch. Sorry about that.
Okay, thanks a lot.
I mean, the district's quasi through the foundation.
Well, historically, that was the role. That was the
But yes,
from the
you're
beginning.
correct.
It was. but
That change should be noted. Thank you.
that's okay. Thank you. So I don't want to play gotcha with that. It just
But you just
popped
did.
up. But I just did.
Laurel?
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions that I sent in to you. I appreciate hearing about the couple of the funds that are at the foundation, at the Center Foundation, that generate our instructional day grants through the district's process. But it looked to me like there are some other ones, one of which my neighbor asks me about regularly, that are supposed to be generating dollars during the year for student use or professional development, that type of thing. Do you know about what the amount of those is?
I would have to look at that information.
Yeah, I think that would be good to have because it helps with the perspective and people have endowed those funds so that we can take advantage of them. So I'd like to be able to.
So I guess I have a question of the board. Is that level of detail by those individual funds something that the board would like included on our district website in this information, or how should that be disseminated?
So that's with Center Foundation, right? And do they report out on their?
I would
I guess
assume
I'm
so.
curious because if they're not, so like, to what extent are they our funds?
They are owned by us. They are
Okay.
just managing them.
I see.
Yes.
Peter?
I guess I have a question. Do we receive
We
annual
we
or
in
annual
21,
report
22,
from the Center Foundation?
we received about $100,000 from those endowments.
Says-
And they have a variety of different sources. And in general, we just report out the total received. We don't break down typically a lower level of detail. And so I'm asking, based upon this question, does the board want an expanded reporting of those funds to be included in this? Am I to respond to one-offs from board members or community members, or I'm just trying to look for some guidance?
So if a community member has a connection to that fund and is interested in, but usually that would be somebody who's has provided money to the fund and they would be in the loop. I don't have a strong opinion on this.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking too, a lot of these funds have to do with scholarship
Right.
monies for individual students.
I would say approximately 2/3 are scholarships for students when they leave the high school. And I'm not trying to belabor
okay.
this.
No, that's all
I'm
right.
just trying to look for direction.
Well, we've in the past talked about the distinction between Center Foundation and the district's foundation, and trying to understand those relationships. So I'm just curious in terms of all this. And I don't need to know, for example, what the outcomes of the use of those funds happen to be. How many students were awarded, what schools they wish to attend. It would be helpful to know whether, does that happen within the administration? Do we make those decisions of who gets the award, or is it through the structure of the funds themselves that determines who makes a decision about awarding those scholarships?
It depends.
Okay.
We need to stay away from that level of
I was going to say,
detail.
I don't need to know that. And I
Right.
think one of the things.
What
I
I'm
would
trying
say
to ask is, what I'm hearing from a board member is, of the $100,000,
Right.
I reported that 5,000 went to the instructional day grants. The other 95, the vast majority is to students
Right.
directly, whether they're graduated seniors or underclassmen last spring. There is a portion that does stay here. One board member asked about one fund. My question is, am I to expand my reporting to include more information, more detailed information, or do I respond to one single inquiry? What does the full board desire? That's what I'm trying to ask, without belaboring something.
So this has come up, time and time again, if one board member requests information. And what I have always thought, and I still think the same thing, is that if a private citizen or Laurel on her own can file a right-to-know request and get the information, then why don't we just give it to her? Because otherwise, then she's going to have to go do that. So that's my opinion, is that if a community member can get it through right-to-know, but a board member can't, that's a little weird. And to make a board member go through that process, but that's just my opinion. I'm one of 9, but if the information is available, then, and you could get it anyway, then.
I wasn't proposing a right to know. I was asking.
No, I'm just telling you my logic. I wasn't thinking you did.
I was asking, do I answer one question, or do I provide an expansion of this information like
And
we have developed an expansion?
Yeah, what I just said is that if she could get it through right to know, then I support giving it to her. If she can't get it through right to know, then I don't. That's my opinion as one of 9.
Yeah, that logic makes sense to me. But the question is also, do we all need it reported to us, like as
Yes.
part of a
regular
Because
format
quite honestly,
annually.
I could also see this happening. One person asked a board member, what about this fund? And next week, after they watch this board meeting, somebody else asks about another fund. And I'm asking you, what do you want?
Laurel?
Well, for instance, just to clarify why I asked this, one of the reasons is that in the list that we did get on the grants, one of the funds generated about $6,500 this year for current use. And one of their funds that generates regular use for the LifeLink program, for instance, the endowment is larger, so I assume it generates a little more than that. And I can see people being very interested in, and I actually just asked for the total number. I wasn't breaking it down by particular thing, though I think there is an interest. As I said, my neighbor did ask me about one and what happens with that money. But my question was really just the aggregate number for the ones that stayed in the district, because as Dr. Duffy pointed out, that was one of the pieces of the foundation, why we felt we needed a foundation, was because scholarships. So I agree it would be nice to see a listing of them and where our kids go with them. That money leaves the district, and we wanted to have a way to get money that we could use now. One way is these were established before we had our foundation. And I think some people still give to them, but I don't know. And that's why I had asked, and that's what I was looking for.
I understand why you asked. I understand that you asked a question. I'm trying to make sure that when effort is put in to answer the question, that I do it.
Do something that the whole board wants.
Correct.
Because there's a lot of time and effort goes into these
That's what
reports.
I was curious about, the time, and I had not thought that it would be a lot of time and effort. So if it is, that's a good answer.
I get a detailed spreadsheet, but understand that some of those funds are combined into different lines on those spreadsheets. And it's not categorized by this without looking into all of the files, because I don't have the knowledge, and the person that does now lives in Florida. I'll need to go in and understand what is this purpose for? And so I'm fine giving a detailed spreadsheet, and by the chance we get to this next year, we can categorize by stays or doesn't stay. We'll try to make an improvement.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, just because a question can be asked and it might be interesting doesn't mean that it deserves an answer. I mean, that's kind of we have thousands of priorities, and I don't think that this is a priority for the board. I mean, if I want to know, I'll call someone at the Center Foundation and ask them. I mean, I don't think, I would say, I don't want Randy to do that. I understand that someone could get it through a right-to-know request, but that doesn't seem to me, a right-to-know request for this just seems like the person who would submit the right-to-know request would be spending an awful lot of time trying to get at something that is kind of, I mean, no offense to the foundation, or anybody, it's sort of inconsequential. That's my feeling on it.
I wasn't understanding
the
the intent behind the question, or what we were trying to understand.
I will attach a spreadsheet. I will not categorize for this year, if that's okay.
So this,
And I believe.
when you say you're going to attach a spreadsheet, is that doing extra work in response to this question? Because that.
No. The only way that will be extra work is if it's not broken down to a low enough detail to answer anybody's question. But I'll add the spreadsheet because it's going to be more information than we've provided now. We'll make it a practice to add that, and I'll try to break it down by leaving, as Bob O'Donnell used to say, walking away money and money that stays here, so that we can get some increased information. And I just wanted to, I apologize for belaboring the board meeting. but
No, it's okay.
I think it's a
No, I
good.
think it's worth
No,
asking
it's-
because it's,
Yeah.
I don't want you chasing questions.
We
that
have,
aren't
we have a
relevant.
lot of priorities, and even 5 and 10, 15-minute tasks add up over time if they're not a value-added
Well, I don't
effort.
want to do the wrong thing either,
Right.
and then it causes even more
I think that's a
work.
good way to think. It's both opportunity cost and is this value-added information? For me, it's not value-added information.
Not especially, whatever was presented in the memo is sufficient for me.
Same.
I do have another question.
Laurel?
And I may be wrong on this, that's why I sent it in. It looked to me that when I did subtraction between the net proceeds from the foundation this year and the amount that had been raised prior to this year and that was already committed, because it's they're each 5-year major gifts, the foundation raised almost $45,000. And if that's so, and we, of course, spend up to $120,000 in expenses. And what I was particularly looking at is, you had said it was around $100,000 that we got from those funds from the Center Foundation. You just said it was about 2/3 walked away money and a third stayed. I had heard half before, but it didn't really matter. But it struck me that those numbers were fairly similar, and the one we do much less work for. That was part of what made me wonder about the large picture of staying here money as opposed to walking away money.
So the GASD Foundation raised $170,000. The district invested $120,000, and I'm using round numbers. And so, but it's in the upper $40,000, close to $50,000, yes, that the district will have access to in future years, or if we haven't already received it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and why I'm asking about those, does that clarify some of why I was curious about the terms of walking away money and staying here money?
I did not make a connection between the $100,000 that was received from the Center Foundation and the $50,000 from the SCASI Foundation, but
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what I was
whenever you
looking
send
at.
it in.
But these are really different efforts and purposes.
Well, that's why I was wondering about particularly the money that stays here, that is used during the school year.
Right, but if you're talking about proceeds from endowments versus, yeah,
So, but thank you for clarifying those things.
Sure.
okay. All right, Randy, I'll turn it back over to where are
I
we?
was done with that update.
Okay,
I'm sorry. I had one other.
okay.
Based on our MOU, it is supposed to be an annual report that includes a cost-benefit analysis within 3 months of the end of the fiscal year, so I hope when we do get the report, that will be included.
I do not know that I have no expectations that they're doing anything different than they've done in the previous years. If there is a request, that should go through your board representative.
Okay, so then, moving on to the budget development in attachment 7B.
Sure. So we just wanted to, as Donna comes to the table, thank you, just wanted to provide an update. We had, again, a conversation about this at the Finance Committee. We're approaching the time of the year where you need to take one of two actions as required by Act 1 of 2006. One is to adopt an opt-out resolution, or the other is to approve a preliminary budget. We have shown here, based upon our preliminary budget projections for 23-24 fiscal year, what the revenue, based upon our expenses, and what our revenue is expected to be under a 0% tax increase, a 2%, which is typically our average, and 4.1%, which is the Act 1 index. Given that the state of the district's finances, although we still have a lot of work to do on our proposed preliminary expenses, we believe that it is that the district is capable of operating within that Act 1 index, and therefore you would consider an opt-out resolution. And we have built a budget calendar, which is attached at the end of your packet, with those action steps and required action steps for your review. And we will continue to go through that much more closely with the Finance Committee, and we'll have further detailed discussions about our priorities. But just to reiterate, our priorities this year are salaries and benefits, athletics, and student activities and clubs. So we will present a proposed budget for you on December 5th. And then I believe it is, at this point, we would be recommending January 23rd board meeting for a opt-out resolution approval, unless the board has a different approach that they want to take. Donna, did I miss anything? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Thanks, Ricky.
And Donna.
And Donna.
Donna, thank you.
All right.
Randonna.
So for board committee reports, I think, really looking at anything that wasn't reflected in the minutes. Deb, is there anything that you would want to add?
No, everything was either in the minutes or already discussed tonight.
Okay, great. Laurel, communications?
We discussed, because the minutes weren't on this, I wanted to just mention, we discussed a couple things, one of which was wanting to be sure that we had good ways to show appreciation for volunteers as well as achievements of our students and staff. We came up with the idea of that we would develop a letter that we would be able to send out to people. Then we also discussed the committee and the two kinds of work that the committee does, one of which is sort of making sure that when the district takes actions or does things that the community finds out about it. One way sort of we let people know, and the other thing being more the community engagement piece that is interactive and invites people to share thoughts and give ideas, and it can be a dialogue. There are many ways to do it. And what we were thinking about was the idea of meeting twice a year to map out how that would work over the course of the year, since it's not tied to a particular event, but is more just the different ways. So the board coffees would be one example. School climate survey or other surveys could be an example. And there are other things as well that different districts do as ways to engage with the community. So that was, I think, sums up our.
And what we decided on was scheduling those 2 board coffees.
Pardon me?
And we just decided on getting those
Yes,
board
that we will
coffees scheduled.
we will be doing one, thank you, at the probably end of January, beginning of February, another end of March, beginning of April. The next one will be we said lunchtime,
Lunchtime.
and the following one breakfast, because not breakfast, early morning. We wanted to alternate so that people could come. The one we already did was early morning, and they will be in different places in the community. I think I don't want to say where we talked about it because I don't know that we've checked with them. But we did want it to be out in the community where people could come and just really meet us, board members, as well as some key administrators, some top administrators. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a Culture, Climate, and Learning Committee meeting at 10:30 here tomorrow. Then Dan and Jackie, I guess Jackie, you're the one who attended the intermediate unit.
Yeah, so I'm just going to mention 3 things. First is the saga continues to find a home for CIU 10. Lots of twists and turns in the roads, but I'd be happy to enlighten you all if you want to hear more about it. But they're working on it. We did approve district activity passes, so you all should be getting those in due time. So that, and CJ too, you get one. So it gets you into events in the CIU free of charge. And then the last thing I was going to mention was that CIU 10 launched their new website, and it's lovely.
Great.
So if you need anything, it is there.
Good, thank you. Any questions? Ed Foundation Liaison Report, that's me. And we had a meeting recently at the, it was an outdoor meeting. We had a community event, donor appreciation at the University Wine Company that was sponsored by the foundation, and it was a chance for both donors who have been donating to the foundation and recipients within the school district of grant funds to mingle and discuss projects that have been made possible via donated funds. So we were able to hear from a number of teachers in our district, as well as our school social workers, on how they are using funds that have been donated by the community to enhance what they're doing in the classroom, and in terms of some of the social work and services that we're able to provide to families. So that was a really great meeting, I think. But just prior to that, we had a foundation board meeting at the picnic tables out there, and discussed that we've gotten a good number of applications for grants for this coming cycle. There's like a subcommittee of the Ed Foundation Board that's really focused on sorting through the grant applications. So they're working on that right now. And planning is moving forward with the Maroon and Gray event for May. And they had been seeking nominations for the Maroon and Gray awardees for this year. I think they may have just in the last day or so closed that page. But I suppose if anyone has any nominations you would want to make, that you could reach out to Paul Olivet as far as award people to be recognized at the upcoming Maroon and Gray banquet, which will be in May at the Center Hills Country Club. And that's, I think it's like the third weekend in May, but I would need to double check the date. So it might be nice to be able to get a board table there if we were interested in doing that.
Good.
So. Carlene, the CTC Local Advisory Committee?
Yes, we met on October 25th before, we had a meeting before the culinary team cooked for us, which was delicious. And we discussed a lot of things. First of all, we talked about enrollment, and our enrollment is basically what it was last year, which is good because last year was really high, and that's because of the recruitment team that's been going on. They've been talking to the middle schoolers, talking about all the programs that they offer, and they also had they had tours for the parents, which I thought was really interesting, and they also included students who attended cyber and private school and homeschoolers to attend those. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So Ben was really proud of the fact that our enrollment is still up. The PDE update is that out of the 12 schools that was audited, we were the only schools in the state to have no corrective actions, and that happened again last time, so we were pretty happy about that. And when Ben talked about the civil rights review, I thought that was interesting, and that we were cited for not fully compliant, and I want to know why. And it was because on the website, we didn't have our annual policy of non-discrimination, and so we fixed that, and so now we are in compliant. Also, Ben talked about how the building construction technology had lost the POS, and because of, so it's a good thing that we already had our articulation agreement with IUP, so we're okay on that front, but there were a lot of schools that they were affected by that. And then we talked about the gender as far as how many students are taking these different courses. And the state expectation is about 16.35% for non-traditional enrollment. And non-traditional enrollment is when you're talking about like the childcare and art tech. Like those are the ones that you want to see, like predominantly female, predominantly male, and we want to see crossover in those. And so we're below what the state recommends. But for other stuff, we are higher. So we still have to work on some of those. And Ben says that when he does the tour, if there's like a male in childcare, he'll like to point him out, like it's okay, and there's women in audio or auto tech to show that it's okay to do, to cross over. And so we're still trying. We're a little bit below the state for that, but we're still trying. And that was about it. We may have a Realtor program that we are thinking about considering because one of the shareholders brought up this fact that other schools are doing it and CTC program, like that would be zero period, and talking about buying your first home, what to look for, and things like that, a Realtor course. And so Ben said he'll look into about how we could implement that as part of our CTC.
That's a creative idea. Like,
Yeah, I thought so.
Information we could all use.
I know.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Yes, Laurel?
You had mentioned something about the building trades losing I think.
Yes.
A PO,
Program of study.
okay.
And so a lot of these programs that the CTC has, the state has recognized, like for colleges to get credit for that. That's an articulation. And so for us, for the building construction, they're no longer doing that. And that was one of the questions
Okay.
they wanted to find out. And I think a lot of, Ben says that they're mostly focusing on like carpentry, things that because building construction is so general that they couldn't really find articulation for that. So a lot of people are just focusing on specific areas. So that's why they think that the state did that. But if you go out and you get your own articulation, which we did with IUP, then it's okay.
Okay.
We're good with that. Oh, and I'm glad you also said that. Ben shared with me today, it just this morning, as of this morning, PDE has officially reapproved all of the approved CTE programs for the new 5-year cycle. So now we are approved through 2027, when we will then have to go again. So we're pretty happy about that.
Great. Thank you. Carlene, do you have a report from the CAC for athletics? It was not at that
I
meeting.
do,
Yeah.
although the interim superintendent stole a little bit of my thunder when he already started announcing some. But basically, it was a quick recap of the fall sports, because fall sport is ending. A lot of people think this is a quiet time for athletics. It's not. It's really busy because fall is ending, and so you have all the end of the year banquets and everything else, and the winter is starting. So you have all the parents meeting and stuff like that. So it's a really busy time of the year. But I just quickly want to run through this, if that's okay. So we talked about cross country already. The girls golf, they were District 6 championship. The boys golf team was the District 6 championship, and they took 5th place in state. The field hockey was District 6 champion and Mid-Penn Commonwealth Division champion. The girls team was undefeated, District 6 champion. The boys soccer District 6 champion and Mid-Penn Commonwealth Division champion. And the girl volleyball team was District 6 champion. So basically, I had a overall summary of that we did really well, and I'm really proud of all of our athletes. And that we also had early signing for college. And so we have currently 25 total athletes committed to play at the collegiate level, 13 girls and 12 boys, and more will come in the winter and spring, and we anticipate that we'll have basically about 40 to 50 student athletes. So that was a great way to start the meeting with Chris. The girls wrestling team, we're still trying to get that going, and they had talk with parents, and there were about 10 girls that were in attendance. And so a lot of these girls now, we're just doing tournaments that we don't really have a team. And so someone wanted to find out, is it going to be girls only, or is it going to be co-ed? And future, we would want a girls only team, but for now, they're just doing tournaments. And the PIA has a new officials, which is for 16, 17 years old, which I think is pretty interesting. It's a mentorship program, and they will become certified in PIAA officials for middle schoolers. And this is for all sports, and they also will be getting paid. The only drawback is they will not be traveling, so they will only be on the home level, so, But, so we want to know what this training involves. And basically, they'll be getting a rule book, they'll be taking a course online, and they'll have to take a pass test. But the most important thing, that they'll also be getting on-field experience with mentors. So we thought this is a great way for kids that love sports, but they don't feel like they want to play, and at least they'll be involved in it, and also kids that play sports, and now they'll have a better understanding of it and all the rules. So all around, I think it's fantastic, and that's basically it. And we wanted to find out how is he with coaches for the spring. He says there's always trouble around there, but he'll deal with that when he has to deal with that. And so far, we're okay for the winter, and that was basically it.
Great, thank you. Peter?
You have a question?
And Debbie, go ahead.
I just wanted to add as well, the girls soccer team won, I think it was like the Citizenship Award or something for their efforts raising money. So I feel like that's something that we should celebrate as well.
That's true.
And I was just looking at some all-division teams, and we definitely had some kids that show up on the soccer, and I assume that we had other players on other teams as well. So some individual accolades as well. So congrats to everyone.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That is true. I did write that down, and I forgot to say it, so thank you.
I also want to say, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was approached after that park authority, that big joint meeting by the rep to the park authority, Bill Keogh, about the officiating. And if he didn't reach out to you, keep your eye out for a communication from him, because he wanted to talk with you and I believe Mr. Weekland about those officials. I said, I'm not on that committee. I don't do very much with that. So just as a
Okay.
heads up.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just to let you know that the administrators are looking at the girls wrestling to see what a proposal would look like and how much funds it would take to actually put one together. So hopefully that will be coming to CCL eventually with that information.
Okay. It'd be interesting to see it, like what the statewide, like what competition opportunities there are. So like if the,
Well, what I come to understand is that there's girls tournaments that they would go to, and that's where they would participate in. So.
great, thank you. Okay, we have not had a finance, or a facilities CAC meeting. Gretchen, finance? Or Laurel, have you gone to, there hasn't been one lately, has
No.
there? School health and safety?
I think it's one is coming up in January.
Okay. Technology? There's a good one. Okay. So looking forward to our upcoming meetings. We have on December 5th, board reorganization and regular meeting. And with that, I would like to call for a motion to adjourn this meeting, and we will be moving on to a board work session. But we'll take a short break first.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. All in favor of adjourning? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We are adjourned then. And we can take a short break and then reconvene.
That's his time.
And call to order this work session. The purpose of this is for us to have some discussion about our committee structure and schedule. So we will have time for public comment at the end. I guess I better open up my Zoom. Is this on Zoom as well, or? I guess it is. Is it the same link?
It is.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Okay.
There's nobody on, so.
Oh, okay. So
Do we have to call it to order?
I did that.
I'm sorry. I was busy looking for the form.
That's okay.
Sorry.
So the purpose of the meeting is for us to have a discussion about how what we want our meeting schedule to look like and how we want committees to work. Since we have board reorganization at our next meeting, and that's an opportunity for people to shift around their committee responsibilities if they so would like to. And so I think one of the things that Mr. Johnson was interested in doing was to try to be more efficient with our use of time in terms of how we're working in committees and then what is coming to the whole board after it's already been reviewed by committees. We put together with Mr. Johnson and Amy and I had put together an idea for using work sessions on Monday nights to have one of our meetings each month to be primarily a work session and to have most of our voting items the following meeting, so that we're trying to put together information discussion and those kind of longer, more meatier discussions on one meeting, and then most of the action items on the following meeting as an idea. And you can see what was in the memo, and if you have any questions about the ideas that we proposed, but we want to hear from you all what your thoughts are.
Well, go ahead, Deb.
I was just say, I probably have several thoughts, but my first thought, just as a reaction to how you characterized it verbally, I'm assuming that we'll have the flexibility to have voting items come when they need to come.
Yes.
Right, because if most of the voting is supposed to be only once a month, sometimes we have timeliness concerns. So that there needs to be some flexibility there.
Absolutely.
I guess. And then also, especially like with finance, with the budgetary process, it is possible that some part of the meaty discussion won't be ready for that work session night, but it will be ready for the second meeting in the month, and it needs to be done before the first meeting of the next. So sometimes the meaty discussion isn't going to end up on the night that you want it to be, I guess. Is that okay?
So there's, for routine items, there will be opportunities for those reports or those items to come to the board for a vote at the end of, towards the end of the meeting.
Okay.
Like just throwing an idea that I think has come up before, and that is in this idea of isn't compressing some of our board work for the for one of the committees, or for a designated committee to be presented to the committee of the whole, which is the whole full board, that there's some different, one of the realities that's out there is that there are different levels of attendance and participation by board members in different committees.
Right.
And Culture, Climate, and Learning happens to be a more popular committee. It's one that really more about the meat and potatoes of what you do in the schools. And so people are more inclined to want to attend that. So practically speaking, it would make sense, if you will, pragmatically, to have the CCL occur before the committee of the whole on a monthly basis, rather than have it broken out as a separate committee meeting and to which most board members would attend. So it would make sense, practically speaking, to have it occur during a regular board meeting. I mean, that was among the ideas, I think, that was behind this at the time.
I think one of the goals that we did want to, was to figure out, is there a way that we can schedule CCL so that everyone who wants to attend can attend?
Right.
And also the idea that because these are some of the meatier topics that we should, since so many people want to be discussing these, should it simply be a committee of the whole?
Right. Yep. I mean, you're essentially saying what I've been trying to say. Thank you.
No, I think you said it. I was just, yeah.
But this is now how it's written now, like the first way that it was presented to us about the 3 separate committee going on at the same time and then afterwards. So this is totally different now.
Yes.
Right,
Correct.
because that was not strongly supported, to have, because there was concerns about missing.
I'm missing. Certain board members wanted to participate in multiple.
This is sequential.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could question whether it's doable, but.
And the other thing is, if everything is not able to occur within that committee of the whole, that we could have a breakout session, work session, to tackle those items during the day.
We're
So-
kind of assuming that we would need an additional work session
Yes.
midday,
Mid-
potentially, yeah.
I'm going to say something I think was Peter's idea, but I'll say I have an idea. I don't know. And I talked about it with Laurel too, but just in thinking about that we were going to be talking about this tonight, somehow just in verbally processing, we sort of came to the realization that, because at first I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense to have CCL once a month on a alternating Monday that's not a board meeting night, because then it's a committee of the whole, everybody could be there who wants to, you don't have to be there. And then we started to think, but isn't really sort of the opposite idea, that maybe it would be a good idea to actually, instead of make CCL bigger, contain it, because right now it feels like everything in the kitchen sink goes to CCL, and theoretically, culture, climate, learning, you actually could put almost anything in there. And so maybe to not put everything in that committee, but just have it as discussion items in a board meeting. And so CCL could do other things, but things that are important that everybody really should know about would just be in a full board meeting. So that was, I hadn't thought about it in that way, that do we want to make that committee bigger, or do we want to just make sure that everybody has access to that information and able to participate if they choose to do so?
So it's a way of organizing agenda items to prioritize them going to info discussion at a board meeting rather than.
Especially thinking about the fact that our meetings, I mean, they used to go till 1 a.m., but they don't lately. I mean, they're much shorter than they used to be, and that maybe some of those items, if it's appropriate for them to be discussed by everybody, that they would go and do a full board meeting instead of a special CCL meeting. And then also thinking about staff time. I mean, I know I've heard Linda, for example, say, I don't want to come in on a weekend or at night, so, having an evening CCL meeting and then making all the staff people come in the evening for I don't know. But if they're here anyway for a board meeting, and then those items would go onto a discussion for a full board meeting, then that'd be
The same
different.
night as a board meeting.
It would be the same night as the board meeting.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about your idea, I'm talking about my idea.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
So it wouldn't be a CCL meeting, it would just be part of the agenda
Right.
of the full board. It would not be, that's the idea, that instead of making the committee bigger, you would just put it in a full board meeting. Those items that are pertinent to everybody being informed and having the ability, I know Carlene and I have talked about this, to participate, which sometimes we feel like we don't in a CCL meeting. But if it's a full board meeting, obviously, anybody, any board member can participate. So anyway, that was just, in verbally processing, those were some things that, the discussions I've had with other board members have sort of been brought to the surface.
Well, and practically speaking, as the current chairperson for CCL, when there are 6, 7, 8 people there, and there are 4 identified board members who are included in the group, but there may be twice as many people there in the CCL committee meeting. And then, making sure that you provide equal opportunity for everybody who attends to participate takes a lot of time. That's more than the hour and a half that we set aside for that. So the whole idea, to me anyway, there are 2 things I like about the formula. One is the fact that there'll be 2 co-chairs identified for each committee, which makes sense to me. I like that idea a lot. But the other thing is that the CCL would be embedded as a committee of the whole within the full board, which essentially is functioning like that anyway, but it's happening during the day, and it makes it really hard to squeeze it into that chunk of time that you've got set aside for it. This is a very pragmatic, very practical solution to some of those challenges that presently exist.
And I don't think it is essentially functioning that way, because, at least not for me, because when I attend a committee meeting that I'm not a member of, I sit in the audience and I don't talk, because I'm trying to be respectful of other people's time. Whereas, so for me, it's not essentially the same. And then obviously if it were in a full board meeting, then everybody would, I think, feel like they could participate.
Right. And I mean, I personally, I would aim for that. I think for that opportunity, that experience, that everybody but not feel they have to hold back by working through the committee of the whole.
Well, I've always felt like if somebody takes the time to come to a committee meeting, that they should be able to.
Well, I certainly work as the chairperson. One of the things I'm trying to do is balance the assigned members with everybody else, and more recently I've been working from the assigned members, and then once we have once they've had an opportunity, then offer it to others, other board members.
I never
to
understood
join in.
that, though, but everybody's a board member. I never understood the difference. That's what I was told when I was not on CCL, which I still have questions about that. I was told, but it's okay, you could go to the meeting, you could talk just like everybody else. So I'm not sure why we even need assigned members versus non-assigned members. If we're all board members and we should each have equal vote, I don't see why Gretchen has to go sit out there, because she has questions. So I don't, it's like, okay, only the board people, on the committee talk first. And, guess what, we ran out of time, so the non-board people, like you're not on the committee officially, you can't talk. I never understood the rationale behind that. It never made any sense to me. We're separating people that's on the board. If, like Amber said, if you're going to take time to come out and be part of it, you should talk like everybody else. It shouldn't be, just the committee people, then afterwards, it's the person. Because then, everything I was told, why wasn't I on the CCL committee? Oh, it doesn't matter, you could still come. Yeah, but I could have to come speak after everybody. So it makes me feel like I'm really not part of the committee. And I just never understood why that was a thing.
Yeah, I feel like that's not, I'd rather have everyone feel like they're that their contributions are of equal value as long as they've attended. I think having people assigned to the committee, though, ensures at least that we have, like when you're going to have a meeting, that there's people who know they need to be there. You know what I mean? Rather than having a meeting that maybe but other than that, I think, so people know they have a responsibility to be there. But if maybe not everybody's going to come to every committee meeting. But I do think when people come to a meeting, they should be able to participate. So, Peter, I know you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, I mean, this is my perception, is that in terms of all of the committees, a question that I would want to have answered and have all in front of me would be, what the charges of the board, what the charges of each committee are stated formally. Because the charges to each committee should create the constraints on each of the committee, each of those committees. You know, so finance and audit has some charge, communication, facilities and grounds, blah, 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 right? And then the conduct of any individual meeting or any committee then is dependent upon, in my view, who is chairing that committee and who they end up facilitating that meeting with often with a staff person, right? And so that's up to the discretion of those chairs, right? And then we have this kind of super porous system where you go to a committee, and even if you haven't been told that you're on the committee, you're on the committee, because you can show up. It's just that you're going to speak last if you're going to speak, but then, you know, maybe some member of the public who likes to act like they're on the board can show up to a meeting and like just sort of act as if they're a part of the board and say whatever they want whenever they want. And so there's this kind of like wild, like unenforced set of, I mean, there aren't even maybe norms in them. And so for me, I'm like, well, I don't understand what the constraints are. I don't understand what the rules are. There's porous membership. We're not clear about that. And then what ends up coming to the full board for deliberation could either be a replica of what already happened and isn't even necessarily an action item. And so I'm just kind of like, I just feel like it's this like amoeba, and it just kind of moves around. And to me, CCL is the biggest, slipperiest amoeba of all of them. And I'm like, that seems to me, as one board member, just myself, where the quote-unquote problem is. And it's just, it sprawls. And like everyone has said that it sprawls. Each of those things, I think, has to do with it. And I don't go to that meeting. I've been to one. It was when we were discussing the MOU, right? Remember, Dan was out of town. The MOU for Officer Bernier was there. That was great. It was super informative. But that had right? That was really discreet. And I don't hear that about the rest of them. And so I don't go to those other ones, and I don't want them in a regular board meeting, because I don't want to have to deliberate through all that stuff for myself. That's maybe selfish. That's why that exists, and like that seems to me where the problem is. I'm sorry if I'm being like aggro about it. But
I think a good follow-up to where, so I think the fundamental question before, so committees, so I've been here 7, whatever, so years, and committees had been around for a couple years before.
They were around when I started, so,
Right,
yeah.
but kind of became more solidified in your first 4-year term, right?
They
A
did.
little bit.
And I had, partly because I had suggested that that we needed a finance, so CCL already existed, communications already existed. It was finance and audit and facilities and grounds that I had requested that the board form. And those, I think, have functioned in pretty solid ways, I think.
Right, so, but my point was, like, we know in the past 10-plus years, there were a lot of things neglected, curriculum, facilities, like, historically, right? And so then there came a time when a lot of things were, I don't want to say crumbling, but there were a lot of concerns about some things. And so forming committees to get a large amount of work done by smaller subsets of the board was really important. And I think that was still, in my first term on the board, very much so the case. I think as I've been in this second term, and now as we have the new board members that have joined us in the last 2 years, I think we've gained a lot of efficiencies. We've also at least laid a lot of foundation about a lot of the problems that we had. Facilities, curriculum, we have a curriculum process in place now. We're not done, we're still working on it, all those things. So there's a lot more foundation there. And I don't disagree. There has been some pros and cons. Sometimes things are going through committee and coming back to the full board in the exact same status. Now we maybe don't have a lot of discussion about it and can vote on it and be done. And that's great for making for a quicker board meeting. The downside is that, like, the question is, what is the purpose of the committee? Is the committee supposed to be a smaller subset of the board to get the process going and reduce some of the work for the full board? Because that's, I think, in general, the purpose of committees, but it has kind of flip-flopped. And we have certainly, when you guys first came on, we did encourage you and say, like, and when I first joined the board, I did go to a lot of committee meetings because I just needed more institutional knowledge, more historical knowledge, and so that helped me. And then I started going to them less. I think you guys are finishing your first year. Some of you have been really interested to go to all the meetings. Some of us older board meeting members still go to a couple of things when there's something confusing going on. So I guess the real question I think we have before us is the purpose of committees to be a smaller subset of the board? Like, are we finally at the place, now that you're new board members, that we have trust, that you know all of us, we all know each other? Do we trust those 4 people to go and do that work in committee and get it done and feel like we're not going to repeat massive deliberations at the full board table, listen to recommendations from the committee in conjunction with the admin, and potentially move forward? If we're not, because sometimes a couple years ago, that wasn't happening from committees. We would go through everything in committee and then we'd spend another half an hour or more at the full board table again, which made the committee's work redundant and not necessary. So we have to decide, I think, as a group, is there enough trust and confidence that we want to send 4 people to do this job? And I'm not saying you should be banned from coming to a committee meeting if you're not on the committee. And I admit, I've talked at committees that I wasn't on. But I don't know. All I know is I keep hearing from the administration for years and years and years, they need to be in buildings. And I don't know if you've had time to read the almost 300 responses to the survey that we put out for the superintendent search. But between that and the town halls, what we've heard from staff and faculty is that they want administrators in their buildings. They want to build authentic relationships with them. And so I think that we've heard that request over and over and over again. And so it behooves us that we have to give in some way to help accommodate and make that happen. So either fewer of us maybe come to committee meetings so they can potentially be shorter, or we shift to committing to bigger meetings and either have committees of the whole or shove everything in info discussion and nobody's going to get upset that it wasn't I don't know what the answer is, but there has to be some other scenario if we want to meet the needs of both us feeling prepared and enabling the administration to do their job and be in buildings and build relationships with other building level administrators and teachers. And that was a lot of talking on this topic.
It may be, so to some extent, an opportunity cost for us being in buildings as well. That times that we're in committee meetings, maybe we would be better off visiting a program sometimes. But.
And it may be that we can't reach a decision before the reorg. And while it would be helpful to have a framework before the reorg, rather than have to make assignments and make shuffling and have people be confused, I also feel like there's no rule that we can't change how we have committees, partway through the year. So, I don't want to make a bad decision based on rush, but I think we need to seriously consider a change.
Yes, and I also think that 4 board members is not going to cut it. Because right now we have most of the board members come into the committee meetings, and even still, when it comes to the full board, there's a round table, there's further questions from the board members that weren't there. So the trust, if you would call it that, is not there. So that's why, one of the reasons I'm asking for at least the whole board for these focused areas that really need board discussion, that everyone's there. And the things that are covered in CCL, a lot of those items should be related to our strategic plan. which is pretty important as far as assessments, the assessment data that you're going to see come in. There's something every month that's going to be in regards to that. So I really think we really need to look at the structure and what we're doing here.
I do have a question also. I think you're right. I think there's still trust that needs to be among the board members. But I also think another reason is that the minutes, because if I miss a meeting, I really try to read up the minutes before I come so that I could have an understanding of what's going on, what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to be voting on. And I think that that's something, especially if we could get the minutes a bit earlier, then that way at least we'll be on the same page. So.
And it's hard to get you the minutes when we have our committees that are all throughout the month and really close up to the board meetings. Like you have a board meeting and you might have one or two, but you most likely 3 committee meetings, and then you have another board meeting a week after that or 2 weeks. And then you have board leadership that you're supposed to get that information, prepare for the board meeting. It's a constant turnover, and it's just that's what we spend our days doing, is preparing for the committees and the board meetings. And so it really hurts us getting into the buildings and doing the things that we need to do.
Jackie.
So, first of all, I totally agree that the policy committee needs to work on the backlog, and meeting once a month is totally reasonable. I would love to hear your take on, I'm not sure I understand why co-chairs and why that would be a desirable thing. Just because I feel like setting the agenda is a lot more efficient with 2 people rather than 3. And like it becomes like you introduce 3 people and it's suddenly a much more formalized situation. It can't just be a phone call, right? And I'm also I'm not clear on how if each committee is still going to potentially have breakout sessions once a month. I don't see how.
Oh, that was not necessarily each committee except policy. Policy just needs to keep meeting.
Okay, so all the other committees are only going to meet once a month in the evening.
So
period.
the idea was that we would have a work session, an additional, rather than having CCL, F&G, and finance and audit, and/or communications, every month, we would have one work session
As a whole,
as a committee of the whole
during the day.
during the day.
So we'd do it twice. We would, so like, say there's.
So we'd all get together during the day?
Yeah.
Yes.
See,
And run through all those focus groups except policy, because that needs to be a smaller.
But that's
So there'll be one evening meeting and then one in the
if we don't get to everything.
yeah.
Yeah, and then.
One during business
If
hours.
necessary,
Have one,
it's an as needed.
It's as needed. So if we have committee as a whole at the
So if I
first
kick
meeting-
enough people under the table during that meeting. No, I'm kidding.
And if we don't get through everything on that agenda, then we go to a day board.
A breakout
session.
in a daytime session. Okay.
But it would still be the.
I think so, and
committee
as,
a whole.
maybe on an ad hoc basis, when there's a bigger thing that we need to take more time on. Like the SPPA, we did a work session on that.
And there's just co-chairs, just in case one person was not able to make the meeting.
how are those co-chairs elected?
Will that be part of the reorganization?
Because, again, if everybody likes CCL and everybody wants to be a co-chair, or everybody wants to be in the, how is that?
I think Dan's done.
I can pass.
Yeah, I was
I've been doing this for
suggesting,
7 years. I don't need to do it for
I mean, I
the,
have to say, Carlene, everybody's taken turns doing different things, like.
It was
we've
just a
all-
question. I'm just
Yeah.
wanting to know how is it elected?
Well, according to, so before, when we had formal committees, the process was the chair was elected. In terms of assignments to committees, historically, it was assigned by board leadership in conjunction with the superintendent in terms of trying to meet as many people's desires and needs as possible. And just, it's not always possible to meet everybody's needs, because we have some board members that work full-time, some that don't, so we try to put people people where we think they can serve well.
And then, yeah, and then that's always brought to the board for approval. So we've
Yeah, and
always
that's
brought committee
historically.
assignments to, or come to the board for approval at reorganization. So they can always be changed at that meeting before they're approved by the board.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a recommendation from the board leadership that's placed on the
And in
agenda.
terms of the co-chairs, I think that we would ask for what the interests and things were. I think part of the reason doing co-chairs gave us 8, right? 8.
Gives us 8 slots, so
It gives us 8 slots, so. it was-
everybody would be co-chair of one committee.
Exactly.
I'm cool not being a co-chair. Well, I mean, like, that's not an issue for me, but
Well, we just want to make sure it was clear for everybody.
yeah.
What the intent, that's partly another reason why we put co-chairs. If somebody's sick, somebody was away, and it also gave everybody a seat. Well, basically, for the president.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you just alluded to it, someone, I think maybe CJ. To me, a lot of the stuff, the big question is, what is full board versus a committee? So you mentioned the strategic plan and CCL doing that, but to me, the strategic plan is it's so big that it really is a full board thing, and to have it put into a committee has never made sense to me. It seems to me that the idea of committees comes from, we think of all the work that the board has to do, things we vote on. And there are certain things that need more or want more discussion, or that people might want to take a chunk and organize it. Something that comes to mind is the SRO discussion. Not the discussion, but what information do we need to make this decision? Who might we want to consult? And having a small subgroup who's doing that work and then brings it forward, that could be helpful. But to have that small group make decisions on it is not, to me, is both not acceptable, but also not transparent. And
That's
it
not
seems to me that more and more, some of the stuff that goes to committees, when I look both at tomorrow's agenda for CCL and back at the finance agenda, a lot of those things are board things. I mean, being on the board does take time. It shouldn't take tons of time. But I would, when I look back at what the original ideas were, they were much more charge-oriented, and what Peter said with that made sense to me. That when a topic comes up, like say the SROs had come up, that might be something that as we look around at each other, we say, do we want to charge a committee with that? Either an ad hoc, or if we have a standing committee, then it could go to there. But the idea of them just doing routine sort of check the box thing just does not make sense to me. And I think that's often, when we have an agenda of 6, 7, 8 items, there's no room for discussion. And if part of the point of a committee is that it is a subset of those who have a particular interest, having discussions that are not the outcome, but are shaping, which was what I had thought originally they were.
I think the
That- no, no,
challenge
no,
with
but-
CCL is we all ran for the school board because we
But
have,
then we should all be doing it.
yeah.
So the other thing is, a part of what I'm envisioning is that the co-chairs would meet with the administrative liaison to figure out what is worthy of discussion, what should be brought forth that is needed of board discussion. Or if it's just an informational item. If it's just an informational item, that could be sent in an email, or it could go directly to the board as a informational item. But if it's for board discussion, that's something that would be a part of the work session. And that would be up to the administrative liaison and the board co-chairs, that they would meet and go over that agenda rather than an agenda just be presented to them. So they would go over the agenda, what the items are, and say, hey, this is worthy of discussion, this is more info, this is more of an email, those type of things,
So you're-
to
Just to clarify.
prioritize those.
You're imagining that the administrators, you and the administrators, would basically say Randy is the finance guy. So Randy, because he knows that, would meet with those two people and say, okay, here's all the different stuff I'm working on. And together, the three of them would sort of say, well, yeah, this I think we're going to need to discuss as a board. This is not just a tell them or a very simple thing. We need to talk about it. So that's the type of thing that would then,
Yes.
but we would not still have committees. It would be a committee of the whole,
It would be the.
other than
yes.
policy.
Correct, other than policy. until policy's caught up. And then obviously when
Yeah, it's a big
policy's cut
spot.
off, we can bring it forward.
I think you had a question for us.
Debbie, did you have a question?
I mean, I have thoughts, but I can wait. I didn't raise my hand or anything.
Oh, okay. I thought
Yeah.
I
No, no.
wasn't sure if you. If
No,
you-
I was probably.
So Randy and I, we do that,
Yes.
right? For the facilities committee, and there are things we say yes, no. If we have maybe a question about it, I think it appears. You know, so I feel like on that committee, that's pretty much working. In terms of like what we want meetings to be thorough, efficient, and fair, right?
And transparent.
Yes, but that's not in the meeting itself. That is a condition that the district should create so that people can see what's going on, right? Like, but in what the meeting is supposed to do, it needs to have enough detail in it that it's worth doing and we're learning what we need to learn. And then it should also be conducted in a way that the people who are there, who are recognized as having voice, should be able to have voice. No individual person should be able to run roughshod over other people, and no person should feel as though they're left out. And so the discretion of the leadership should make sure that that happens. And then that it's efficient, so we're not just like blowing time, right? And those things are always in tension with each other. We are 9 people, 10, 11, 12, right? Who are not just made of endless amounts of time and an even ability to focus. So I feel like, for myself, I want to, well, one, I want to have a certain level of autonomy so that, like, I don't go to CCL. One, because of my job, and like I can only do so much during the day, and sometimes I abuse my lunch hour and make it into a lunch hour in 40 minutes. Don't tell my boss. No, she knows. But like, and then, like, I want our culture of the board to be very judicious with our time.
Yeah.
And I feel like we as a body are sometimes not very good at doing that. And this discussion is just sort of is just making us focus on one way that happens. And then it can negatively impact administrators, right? Who, I agree, and the comments say, hey, maybe we could do that. And so one of the questions I have is, can the chairs be more efficient? All of us. And can you delegate more? And I know that you're the interim, right? So there might be right. So I'm asking you to do this.
There's no delegation as the interim.
No, but
I see
but
what you're
like going
saying.
forward,
Yes.
whoever is in that position,
Yes.
I feel like there's a certain amount of delegation,
Yes.
and where we have to build the trust by making a decision that someone else is trustworthy. I just feel like that's a thing that we have to do.
I mean, like, the superintendent doesn't necessarily need to be at the facilities and grounds
Correct.
meeting. Right.
But
I love
Be
you.
welcome
I love
to
you,
be there.
sir.
But they should be
I
welcome.
love you. You're
They're-
very
yeah.
welcome to come.
given the topics that
But-
are talked about, and then also brought to the table, and then having to know what was discussed, it behooves me to be a part of those discussions. But the other thing that you talk about, yes, finance, for example, you do that. But then it comes, you talk about it, and then it comes here to the board meeting. And then we have another lengthy discussion, depending on the topic, because people have questions, because they weren't part of the committee, or it's on the board and they have questions again that you know, they ask prior to the board meeting, which is great. I mean, I love that part. But then there's here, and then they ask other questions or deliberate. And it became a board meeting that was supposed to be maybe a half an hour becomes 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours. So those are the things that I am trying to be more transparent by having everybody be at the committee meetings, to embed trust as well, because everybody was there and had their say or heard it, so that when we come to the board meeting, it is really governance and everybody's heard it, and we're just, it's succinct. That's my vision, hope, but I don't know. And just so you realize, I've talked to other superintendents. I'm this is not me just, you know, pie in the sky kind of thing, thinking out of the box and saying, all right, let's do this because I thought of it. No, this is something that has been thought about. I have talked to, I want to say 4 or 5, just superintendents just off the cuff to say, what kind of board work meetings do you have? And most of them have this committee of the whole first, and then a actual board meeting.
Which is essentially a voting
A
meeting.
voting meeting.
What made you decide to even approach that question with them?
Yeah.
What made you decide to even?
Repetitiveness or
Yeah,
redundancy?
it just, even when
I
I was
am just-
assistant superintendent,
Yeah.
and I'll go there. When I first got into this role as assistant superintendent, we would cover something, for example, CCL. It will then go to information item, and depending on whether it needed a vote or whatever, it then go to action item, and then it'd be voted. So it was like a 4-step process when it was. Everybody it was, other than Peter, was there. And when
And
it
they all
came,
wanted to
Peter was
vote.
the one that had the discussion or question. But it was just this multi-step process that seemed awfully inefficient and
Right.
time-consuming.
And I will say, like, when I started on the board, there were sometimes administrators would bring us stuff in committee, and we'd be like, oh, like, we need a lot more information. Like, the other board members are going to have a lot of questions about whatever. And I don't think we're in that same place with the staff any longer. I think largely what we're seeing at committee, I don't think too many times in committee have we said, you really need to add to this memo, or this doesn't have enough data, or you need to expand. I don't know. Have we?
I think it happens a lot in finance.
I don't know if it happens a lot in finance, but yeah.
Randy.
Periodically, there are topics that come up in finance that I feel like we have a very useful conversation that improves the presentation to the full board.
Yep.
I do believe that that is true.
Yeah.
That said, there are other times when it's the exact same thing that comes to the board, and we didn't need to have that
Exactly.
conversation ahead of time. So, I mean, I do think it's a mix.
And I think Randy oftentimes, maybe it's facilities and finance that he does this, but I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he finds it useful. He finds the committees useful, and he'll say, you know, what questions do you have? What do I need to include in here that I didn't? You know, is there something that you're hearing about concern that I don't know about? And I think that's a good use of time when we do that.
Randy's acute
And my
chronic
question though
anxiety
is
drives
just,
him to
is there a
over-prepare.
reason that couldn't happen at that first Monday work session? Because whether it comes to committee or it comes as info discussion, like, most of those things, the goal is that changing us to a structure, something related to what he's proposing, really puts the onus on him and his team to be planning appropriately so that things are coming to us in enough time that if we need additional things when it comes back for a vote, those questions or that additional information can be provided. So, so by shaping our, by saying, okay, we would try this, that also puts work on them Because we know sometimes in the past, we didn't always get things in timely enough manner, and then there was scrambling at committee saying, well, we need all this stuff before we can vote on it, and those
Is
things.
the idea that there would no longer be info discussion in a board meeting? That would just be action items we vote on, and then the info discussion would happen in this committee of the whole or whatever?
There would still be informational for the voting board meeting, yes. But it depends on what the co-chairs and the administrative liaison feels. So if it warrants the discussion, then yes, we would have that at our work session. If it's something that's more of a FYI but important for the board to know, that would go to the informational item and
Like
for the
say when
voting.
Jean presents the pays data results or something, you know, well, I mean, sometimes we discuss that. I'm trying to think of something.
Just something that, I don't know, I mean, CCL, certain contracts come up that are above the $5,000 or whatever. It might be an informational item, not something that we need to discuss at a work session. It should be those things that we want to discuss, that we want to have input in or talk about, where informational item could be more of a, it could be those things, but I'm thinking more of those things that are, just a heads up, FYI kind of thing.
I think this is, like, we could just, even if we were to not change our structure to this manner, we could still change the way committee meetings are to work more in that manner. For example, simply, like, sticking with, like, only putting a topic on CCL if it's because it requires discussion. That, those things like those contracts, those, in my mind, don't need to go to CCL. There's things that go to CCL that simply need to go to information discussion for the whole board, and there's not a need for, I think it's when there's a need for a process conversation that a committee meeting is effective, or in the case of finance, where we're helping to like refine what the questions are that would be brought up. And so when there's, in facilities and grounds, for instance, we have had situations where we're like helping to shape, like, what is the process going to look like? Like, what are the decision points that are going to need to be mapped out along the way in a process such as the enrollment study, or, doing those elementary school buildings, or we have Park Forest Middle School coming up, I hope sooner rather than later. What are the, like, mapping out processes is something I think committees are really good for, rather than bringing that as an information, like, that can come as information discussion once it's had some time with a smaller group mapping out a process. We may be able to just like simply really streamline those agendas for committee meetings and just not have nearly as much on them. Because things that are simply an FYI or that don't require a significant amount of discussion, those just need to go to like, to me, that just needs to go to information discussion.
Yeah, so going back to even when Peter was speaking, because I wanted to, when he was talking about it being more efficient, I agree with a lot of things that he said, that about having, when you deliberate and to stay on topic and, to the co-chairs or the chair to make sure that we stay on topic and, we finish. And also I was talking to Amy about that, about starting on time, because that's something that really bothers me, that people can't, we shouldn't be coming in at 7 to start a meeting at 7. We should be here like 10 to 7 to start at 7 so that we could be on time. And I think a lot of our meetings too, sometimes when we have end time, and my husband told me, when are you coming home? I said, I have no idea, because we have an end time, but no one cares. And I think if we put an end time to our meeting, I think we should try to stay to that. And I think because everybody knows that it doesn't matter, then people go off topic all the time, and our meetings are not very efficient. And that bothers me because, if you put an end time to a meeting, then I think sometimes if I have a question, but it's something that somebody already said, then I won't say it because it's almost time to leave. And I think we should be really mindful of people's time And even though some of us are not working, we do have responsibilities, because I've heard that a couple of times, you're not on the committees, because we have to put priority for the people that are working, and no one knows what other people are doing or their life. And so I don't think it's fair to say that as one of the reasons why one person was chosen on a committee and another wasn't, even though now this is going to change. I do believe that a lot of people have their own schedule that maybe people don't know about, and I think that we should value everybody's time. One thing I wanted to add on finance, as far as discussion, I always felt in finance, because I love math, I love numbers, and I love finance. And that was a committee that I also wanted to be on, that I wasn't. And I also feel that as going to these meetings, it wasn't really a discussion. It was kind of information that Randy would just present to us, and either about opting out, about the index, or whatever. And so I always felt, unlike CCL, where these are really discussion and, the committee wants to know these things, I always felt that I'm not sure, except for this other thing that I thought, because I was just on CTC, and there was a contradiction with what we were told was the balance, and Randy was saying we have 16,000 surplus, and I knew that we only had 10,000 because of what we budgeted. So that was a discrepancy that I wanted fixed. But other than that, when I've gone to finance meeting, Randy just kind of presents us the expense and the surplus, and where we're taking one fund out of this and one fund out of that, and it's usually not a discussion. So
Because it's not focused on what the decision points, if it's not focused on decision points for the board, then
It's sometimes if we have surplus and should we take it out of capital funds and everything else, that was interesting, and that was a discussion. But other than that, it's just about, this is where the money were coming in, this is where, that. And he just presents this, and then he does the pie graph stuff, and then we would just all sit there, and we may ask questions about the pie graph, but other than that, it's not a discussion, it's more information, so.
I've forgotten half of what I was planning to say in the waiting, but I will try to hit a few points. I agree that for a lot of the finance stuff, it is just presentation, which is why, I checked in with Randy to say, what do you think about, what do we think is working? What do we think could be improved, right? What do you think about this recommendation? And he seemed on board with trying it. We can try it. I agree that sometimes at finance, I would say sometimes, because I've gone to CCL because I've been interested, there are things that we just do twice. And I would like to avoid the doing twice. And I hear that that's a big part of what we're trying to do. I guess a question, going back to what Gretchen was saying, the difference between the work session and the info discussion, if we make this type of change, then if we bring something up in the work session, it does not then have to go to info discussion before the vote. Correct? Okay, so that's helpful to understand that. I don't know. I'm open to it. I assume that we have ways of balancing workload for the individuals who will end up on the policy committee, because we've basically said we're going to have a committee of a whole for most of our work, right, if we adopt this suggestion, but we are also going to have a policy committee. And if we require everyone on the policy committee to also come to the committee of the whole night, right, because that's one of our 2 board meetings a month, so we kind of expect everybody to be there, then that's a lot of work. Who's going to volunteer to be on the policy committee? But we do have other things.
there's so many other things, though, like the
There are.
CTC Advisory Committee and the
Right,
CACs.
so I'm
and
just
there's a lot of
pointing that out, that I want to be mindful of everyone's
Ed
time
Foundation
and
thing that I
balancing
go to every month, yeah.
workload. I'm also just curious how long we expect this work session night to be, because if CCL's an hour and a half, and finance is an hour, and facilities is an hour, and that's like an underestimate, because if we do have something we need to talk about in finance, it takes a little, we're going to be here from 7 to 11 or midnight? Is that what we're doing? Is that what we're suggesting, or do we actually think we're going to somehow
Want to, but
get it smaller?
Yeah, so the plan is to get it smaller, to, like I said, to bring items that warrant discussion. rather than items that just are informational. You know, there's a lot of things that go to CCL, we present, and there's no discussion. Everybody's pretty much on board with what we're saying. And then there's items that we would love to have some more discussion, but because we have all these other items, we only have like 10 minutes for that discussion. So if that's the one item or the two items, those are the items that we need to bring forth.
Okay.
Also, if we need more time, like there's a hot button item like, I don't know, SROs, for example, we would take a work session during the day to discuss those type of things.
I do think we're going to have a hard time finding
Yeah.
a daytime time that works for all of our schedules, right? If the intent is for the daytime to be a carryover committee of the whole,
Yep.
part of what has worked with the separate committees is that when people have different schedules, right? Different teaching schedules, different whatever schedules, we can accommodate different schedules by being on different
Yep.
committees. So that's just, logistically, I have some concern about us just even being able to find a time during the day that we can all meet. But I'm not, I think it's worth trying something, because I agree that the current committee structure feels like we spend a lot of time repeating ourselves. And, you know, sometimes it's like, well, this was discussed in committee, but since public doesn't often come to committee, we're going to tell you what went on in committee. And I feel like that's unnecessary. I went to the
Right.
committee so that I could hear the conversation. I don't need the recap.
And there's minutes.
The minutes.
Right.
exactly.
Although the minutes are not, you know,
Right.
and they
bad.
can't be, that's not a criticism of the minutes, but the minutes cannot be the richness of the conversation. So it's like, nothing can be the substitute for the actual listening to the actual conversation, but it's something, and it's certainly helpful.
So the question is, if we had a work session during the day, would that have to be all the board members? Or would it be, or could it be just a portion of the board members? I don't know.
A committee.
A
Sorry.
committee.
Literally,
I
yes,
mean,
there is. Yeah.
if you have, like, if we're going to talk about a finance topic, for example, and there was only a certain amount of board members that were interested in continuing that discussion about finance or facilities or whatever that was, to have that discussion, would that work?
Legally, as long as we advertise it, whether it's a committee of the whole that doesn't meet quorum, or it's a committee that the rest of the board winds up coming to anyway, as long as it's advertised, we're just deliberating, not voting, then
I think that's the legal issue of concern, but the non-legal issue that I would have is the reasonable access that all board members would have. And traditionally during the day, you're not necessarily going to have the access that people would have in the evening.
depends on what you do.
No, I understand.
Especially if
mean,
it's not predictable.
I feel like if these are discussions that we're bringing to the committee of the whole to have as a committee of the whole, then why would we change who needs to be at the discussion if we just don't get it done that evening? Like philosophically, it doesn't really make any sense to say, oh, the topics we have to carry into another day, well, we won't require everyone to be there, like, because it just doesn't match with the description of what we're saying.
I think my suggestion for that would be that they would be special topics, maybe not necessarily just because we didn't get to it that night. Not that, like, we ran out of time, but special topics.
Well, what are we going to do with the topics if we just run out of time?
That's, and I think the time is my biggest concern, right? Laurel?
I'm trying to understand, as opposed to saying just, we're going to have 2 board meetings a month. And they're both committees, I mean, we're all there. I'm checking to see if I'm understanding. The idea would be that the first meeting, or the one meeting, meeting A, work session meeting, that the idea there is topics that are actually discussion, not just clarifying questions, like a presentation, we say, you know, can you give me but things that we feel we need to discuss. You know, there's a decision that needs to be made, not just yes, no, but, you know, what tax rate, for instance. It's a real discussion with different opinions, often, not always, but, and those do take a little longer. They would be one. then on the other meeting, first of all, there would be voting, both routine. We could vote at both, but primarily anything at the first one would be routine. And then, is that the place then, because the other piece of presentations is the public getting to see them. So is the idea that the second meeting would be where we'd have information things like, say, a presentation that we might ask clarifying questions, but that we're not expecting to have a discussion of? There's not a question there's not a voting point. It is, like, for instance, the assessment results. We're not voting on those, they just are. We may have questions, we may need more explanation because the paper may not make sense. That those things would go on the second meeting? Because I think that piece of discussion versus questions is a big one. And I think we haven't had enough time often for discussions, for real, we're not maybe all on the same page, or we want to discuss versus questions. It seemed to me that a lot more has been, here's the thing, ask your questions, now this. And I think if this would help us do that, have the discussions where discussions are needed, that would be very, very helpful.
So I think the MAP scores, for example, are maybe an interesting question, right? So that's information to the board, but there should be discussion that comes out of that, because it should lead to, like, we're not just getting that information just to have it in our heads. We're getting that information so that we, maybe not at the meeting where we're given the information, but then that you might need time to absorb it, and you're asking questions and coming to understand, but that should lead us to next steps, right?
Well,
It's like-
evaluation of programs, for example, whatever's happening at MAP assessments will give us an indication how things are going and whether we should be satisfied with the outcome, or should we relate it back to strategic planning in some way. But you don't come to those ideas. This is a good point, Amber. You don't come up to those ideas at the point of presentation. It may take time to process.
Exactly.
And we're looking at so many different sides of this, so many facets to this issue. There are a lot of moving parts in this.
But realize, you're seeing that data, but as a superintendent who's in charge of everybody underneath that, is responsible for making those adjustments. It's not necessarily the board. The board is sees the bigger granular picture and says, these were our goals, or these were where we wanted to be, we're not there. So what steps are you taking to make those gains or those progress, or what programs are you changing? But it's up to the cabinet and the leadership to implement or to go about that. So I think sometimes we get, as a board, too much in the weeds rather than the governance, the policy, the evaluation of what the overall results are. And if we could stay surface level that way, I think you'll realize that you could be a lot more efficient in what you're looking for. Now, that information needs to be presented to you.
Right.
Okay, and that's what I'm looking to do with coming up with plans and things in a timely manner, so you can look and see our growth and see our progress and see what's occurring.
So basically, it's in contradiction to basically what you just said, Amber. It's not a discussion, it's an information. Is that correct?
Well, no, it's both.
So-
It's information, but she's going to see that there needs to be some things
We're going to
done,
have clarifying
and so she
questions,
might
basically,
clarify questions,
but it's
yes.
not a discussion per se. Like, I'm just thinking where that would go in our platform. Should it be brought up as a discussion, or is it just the information part? And according to you, it's mostly information part. Because if you think about it, then CCL is not going to take that long, because there's a lot of things like when Jonathan presented to us about the AP classes and stuff like that, a lot of those were informational.
Yes.
The discussion things we had was the SRO, which was really, everybody had an opinion on that. And so there's not a lot that we really I'm thinking about other things that we had really discussions on, but a lot of it was informational. The curriculum changes, you know, in the lower grades, the joining of the fifth grade class. I mean, a lot of things in CCL really is informational. So
A lot of the information that you are presented to as a board is informational.
that's true. So it's not like, if you're separating the two, like, the first part will be for discussion. You know what I'm trying to get at exactly? If I was on the chair thinking about what I'm going to bring to the board as a whole, you know, for discussion, there's not really a lot. Because a lot of it on CCL is really informational. A lot of it on finance is really informational, you know? And if we're supposed to play our role, like governance, like you said, it's not really a lot of discussion.
But I think we need to be making, like, the role of the board, I think, is like we have to be able to marry up the strategic plan and like what the conversations that are having with CCL and the conversations that are happening in finance, because it's our job to make sure that our resources are going towards
Right.
what our
Correct.
strategic needs are.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
And we need
Yeah.
to assist in helping set those priorities rather than having them set for us. I think we need to have a more, talk about transparent, a more open discussion about the hierarchy of needs as determined by the administration and what our perspective might be in addition to theirs in terms of where the needs are and that connects to finance and paying for that. How many FTEs do we need to be able to accomplish whatever those things are, let's say, or programs, what kinds of programs, not knowing what those programs are, but knowing whether a different type of program is necessary.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think sometimes finance has just been, you sit and get if we're not being presented with options.
Options, that's right.
Peter?
I think Laurel had her hand up before me.
first.
Okay. Each of us thinks about our role on the board differently. So that's obviously, and we're trying to negotiate what we think the ideal kind of configuration of ourselves is even supposed to be.
Yep.
But, you know, when I think about that and maybe what our individual preferences are, not just in terms of like, hey, I like facilities and so I want to go talk about energy, you know, and you know, someone else is like, I love numbers, you know, I want to be in the number room, you know, like put me in the number room, I want to go play with the numbers. Not that you sound like that, Carlene, sorry.
Thank you.
No, but you know what I mean? Like we want to go play where we want to go play as individuals, but it, like listening to what, you know, CJ just said, like where we should be, and I'm going back to like our PSBA training, is at 30,000 feet, right? And I think as individuals, sometimes we want to be like, well, hey, Mike, tell me about like whether you're going to have mini splits and you know, like what? You know, like to get into some of the weeds in some of these things gets us to even waste one another's time, and I'm sorry, like because we want to get into like this little thing or that little thing and that little thing, and it I think sometimes it's just, and I might be guilty of it too, is that's not really our role. And that's as much of a question as it is a statement. Like, are we as individual people, as an individual board member, getting into a place where we kind of don't need to be, and then do we as a board on the whole, can we get into like sort of like, I'll just call it CJ's business, where we don't belong? I'm not
It's
sure.
a-
It's like
It's a really wobbly line.
It
We do
is.
have that policy on board and superintendent responsibilities, though, that is somewhat helpful in
yeah.
elucidating that. Laurel?
Yeah, I think that's exactly, sometimes you need more detail. That tends to come when there's been a question asked. I think that what you were talking about, since we have let's use that example of the MAP schools. Get that? Maybe we all say, this is just going gangbusters, fantastic. Maybe we say, okay, as a board, and often the administrator may have the same concern. We may
Right.
both notice, oh, there's this thing, or maybe that the administration doesn't notice it, but we do for whatever reason. We say, hey, as a board representing the community, we see we need to look at this. My guess is that though we've been talking about the work session first and then the information, it may well go the other way, that the information leads to, hey, this is the pocket, and we want to discuss this further. And then instead of sitting there and trying to do that then, because there may well be things that the administrators want, ideas they want to put together, or more information, something, that would then come later.
But it would cycle anyway, like,
Yeah,
we
they-
might have
they'd all
input
cycle.
discussion at the end, and then the next time we have committee as well,
Right.
we would
It-
have a
it-
discussion.
They would
about it.
cycle, and it also relies on there being times when the superintendent, because there are different ways to approach things. You know, we're going to do, to use one we did a long time ago, block schedule versus not block schedule, where the superintendent may say, hey, yeah, these are, on the one hand, they're ground level, but they're also sort of a philosophy of what matters to us as a district, and the superintendent might say, board, we got some decisions to make. I want to hear from you. I want the discussion. So it relies also on the superintendent saying when there is something that would be helpful to get board input on. That they may have identified that we didn't know about.
Deb?
I would just like to mention one thing that I actually do like about the current structure is that it helps me to spread out my reading throughout the month.
Yes.
And so I guess logistically, in addition to the length of that one meeting, I do have some concern about the quantity of material that we're going to get, possibly just on the Thursday before the meeting, and sometimes all the attachments aren't there. And then you have to read it all in a very concentrated period of time versus
Yes.
part of the reason, I don't always go to all the other committee meetings, but I actually always
Just do the
read
reading.
the attachments before those committee meetings, because then chances are I don't have to read it again before the board meeting, because it hasn't changed that much. So it does help spread out my work a little bit. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't want to make more work for the administrators, but that is one thing that I do like about the current committee structure. So.
Yeah, we don't, things could be sent to us that aren't even that close to the board meeting if they're informational and, you know, sort of like that. It doesn't always have to be the Thursday before if they're ready.
Right. I feel like if it's not attached, well, it's, as long as it's going to be attached. I was going to
Yeah,
say, I don't want to
exactly.
have things that are being sent that aren't then attached, and then we.
No,
lose
but if it's ready,
Yeah.
go ahead and send it and then attach it, but it'll be there.
So I guess I feel like we need some direction on how to move forward.
Well, one of the pieces in this that might help now reduce our work or focus our work, which we talked about, and Curtis, you mentioned this more than once, and that's the idea of the role of the, whether it's one or two, the chair people, let's say, and the administrator assigned to that, really sifting out what are the key topics for the next upcoming agenda, for the next, let's say, committee of the whole. What are the things, for example, in finance that need to be the focus, and separating the wheat from the chaff and all that. What's the fluff? What can we just pass on versus what requires a decision on the part of the committee or on the part of the board? And it seems to me that's going to be an important screening task in all this, and that may make the work of the board more efficient by bringing the attention to specific things that will generate discussion leading to a decision. I mean, am I reading that correctly, Curtis, in terms of what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you, maybe to others too, as well? But I think that's an integral piece, in my view, that will tend to reduce the workload or reduce the number of items we're dealing with, because we're only going to be, that sifting process, that sorting process will bring our attention to those particular topics that are worthy of deliberation.
Right.
Add to
Yep.
that sometimes.
Or Jackie was
Oh,
about
I'm
to
sorry.
say.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I'm willing to try this. Like, I'll definitely put a good faith effort into trying this, and like, because I don't know what's gonna happen until we try it.
Right.
So, I just throw that out there. That
And I think
Good
if
to
we
go
were
if
to
we wanna
try
try
it,
it.
we need to, I would definitely, I had put in, the memo, like, review in 3 months and see if it's working or not. And we could always shift gears then. So.
How soon will we do this? How soon do we plan to implement this?
I would say January.
After the reorg.
Because December, you have to do the reorganization. And I would assume,
Our second meeting in December is not a big meet, yeah.
so I would assume January, if that.
Lynn, at the reorg, do we also vote on the dates for the rest of the year?
Right.
Yeah, so that, then we could kind of announce it as, we could put it
As-
out, and when we do the dates,
Right.
that we would have a different structure.
And the question of like how to assign co-chairs, I think the best way that I can think of well, here's two ideas. One is either everybody sends the current board leadership your interest, right? And rank them like 1, 2, 3 or whatever. And, we try to get everybody their top 1 or 2 choice. And then that would go on the agenda and then, or, like we'd be having conversations, obviously calling each other and talking. And then that would go on the agenda for reorganization. Or we could have like, more than one iteration on that, like put it on the agenda as a tentative and then vote on it at the next meeting.
So my brain has been mushified. So I
can't stop 10
apologize
o'clock.
because I feel like I'm about to ask a question that I think I knew the answer to before. But in the course of this meeting, it's gotten just sort of squished and I don't have a document open in front of me and you're holding it. What time is this meeting going to happen? Is it taking place of just one of the board meetings? Yes. And then if there are action items that had to be done, they would be put on at the end because they just, right? And then we would have the other board meeting in the month. And then we're gonna have no committee meetings,
Well, we're going to have policy committee,
The policy.
except policy.
and if we need to have another work session on a particular topic.
Okay. I mean, I'm like Jackie. I'll give it a shot,
Sure, me too.
Laurel?
but
Yeah, I would too, and I think that thing I said earlier about ad hoc committees is worth keeping in mind, that sometimes instead of that being depending on what it is, if it sounds like something that a couple of people really have a particular interest, or that the full board feels, we need more information, but 9 of us need to go look for more information, and we don't feel that it's just an administrative thing to look for more information, that can be an ad hoc group. When I looked around, it looked like a number of districts use a fair number of ad hoc things as something comes up. They're not decision-making,
Yes, I would agree with you.
and I think
I
that,
would agree. So for example, the referendum, for Park Forest Middle School, when that project comes on, obviously there's going to be major discussions on how that is going to roll out. So I would see that. Or for certain things, we might still need, we'll go through this reiteration. There might be some topics that say, hey, we need a committee for that specific topic. And then once that topic is covered, then we're done with that committee.
So you might, I guess facilities and grounds is one of the main reasons that I had proposed the current committee structure that we have now, because I felt like there were conversations that were missed during the design development process for the high school. Right? And so I wouldn't want to end up in that situation again with Park Forest, so.
And that's what I would
Yeah.
say. We have a project until that project is completed, but we have a habit of creating committee and keeping the committee through whatever that purpose was for.
oh, I'm sorry, there was a second part. The ad hoc one was the other. And the other thing is about the community engagement piece. I had gone back and looked at the committee structure, the committee charge, the original one. And it talked about, we were to work on communications-related charges from the board, including board-led outreach and engagement efforts with the larger community. I think at the time, the big focus was on referendum, but that wasn't the only thing. And while we may not need to do it each month, I do have a concern about it getting lost because that's my concern here, is whether it would just get lost.
Well, I think the idea is that the board president should be tasked with planning community engagement, and it is going to be on, like, it can be an item on work sessions for the,
Part of our conversation was that, much like equity, community engagement is part of all the work that we do. So, you know, as it's foundational. So if we're talking about a park forest project, we're going to have to be talking about what the community engagement process is. What are going to be the meetings that we have to get input? What are the, you know, if we have, I can't think of a good example, but like, you know, if we suddenly decide to change the math curriculum again and we're discussing that at a committee of the whole and it's the focus on CCL items, then that community engagement discussion should really be part of that as a whole. So I think there should be touch points, and it's why we talked about at minimum twice a year, talking about things, whether it's setting the community coffees, is there any other way that we want to do just broad general engagement versus targeted engagement on certain initiatives really should be part of that discussion and that item, that focus area. So that was what our discussion had been in terms of that particular area.
and that it's, yeah, it's something that would be addressed in the work session, the committee of the whole.
Right, so rather than
It
give it a
runs part of
co-chair
the
or whatever, we
project,
just
so the-
charged it to the.
Well, I mean, it would be addressed, like, if there's a, I think, so, for example, during the facilities and grounds portion of a work session, there's going to be a discussion on the enrollment update, the enrollment process, looking at demographics, and if we're ever gonna be needing to redistrict, there would need to be a conversation about community engagement in conjunction with that discussion. But I think that we also want to make sure that we're few times a year having a discussion about our broader community engagement efforts, such as board coffees. And so what my suggestion was, because there's 4 other committees, that's 8 board members, that put the board president on community engagement, because the board president is supposed to kind of speak for the board, right? And then it would be something that, the board president would be tasked with trying, touching base with the rest of the board to as we plan things like, we're gonna do, like a coffee hour at Wegmans over lunch or whatever. And I think that could streamline planning these.
Plus, you're in agenda planning for everything and in communication with the superintendent. So, in terms of anticipating a need for community engagement, I think the board president is the most plugged into that potential.
And it doesn't go away, it's still going to be, it's still an item on the work session schedule. Does that make sense?
So we heard a couple people say they were willing to try it, but I don't know if we heard strong, like, is there people that want to put their foot down and say, I absolutely don't want to do this, or like, that, I don't know, like, we didn't hear from everybody on a,
So I said I'd try it.
okay, you did,
don't
and
like
Jackie
it.
did.
Me too. I'm in to give it a shot.
Okay.
But like, I don't have an alternative other
I
than,
was gonna say, I mean.
then do what we're doing now and just make everybody like limit their time in their meetings and just run an efficient meeting. Like, just do it. I'm getting a little sweary because I'm tired here, and
Like I said, though, at any time, if it's not working, or if we have
No, I hear
a
that.
committee needs to be a committee, we could say, hey, all right, the items here, we need to have a committee for this. And say, or we need to break out facilities, or just like we have broken out policy, we can break out any of those type of things.
And I'll say that novelty of just trying something really different for 3 months might teach us something that gives us a different idea where we're like, well, that didn't work, but here's the thing that did work. And if we take it, so like, even though I think I'm not gonna like it, but maybe that's just because I'm like, I don't want to change or whatever, and I'm being a baby, like, I'll do it. I'll totally do it. But I'm just gonna state my skepticism at the beginning,
That's
and that's
okay.
fine. And if you prove me wrong, cool.
I would say my biggest skepticism is about how long these meetings could be. That I'm worried about either they're going to be too long, or that we're going to not discuss things that we should have discussed because we were trying to keep it from being too long. That's the tension I'm worried about. But again, like I felt like maybe.
I think, yes,
yeah.
I think it's going to be really key that the co-chairs and the administrative liaison are really looking at the items that we're presenting and where. Like, there's a place for each of the items. So is it for discussion for the board, or is it a place for informational item for the other board? Or maybe we need to have a scheduled discussion outside of those two board meetings, you know? Like, I can think of some big ones just off the top of my head.
Right.
But
Well, then we do that
solar
for-
panels discussion is gonna be a big discussion. We might have to have an ad hoc meeting
Or that's the
about.
only focus,
Yeah,
yeah.
but that is the only focus that we talk about those type of things.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
And
I'm
there's
just-
big things, like I think
Attendance.
sustainability and equity are
Balance.
these big things that we're trying to accomplish, to do better at in our district, is sustainability and equity. So those seem like topics that are going to thread through these,
Strategic plan.
right? And that need to be, we need to make sure that we're having the conversations we need to have.
But I also want to chime in that,
Law.
I'm sorry, oh, sorry, Lowell, I didn't realize you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Just a question. Where do you see public comment? I mean, I know it's on here, but we've always said if it's not an action item, you do it now, but if it's an action item, you do it then. How do you see public comment
I thought,
working in here?
I think we could either have public comment at the end of the work session before going into the action items, or just do it at the end. I don't know if I have a strong opinion on that. I think if we had public comment, if the action items are pretty routine and quick, it might be worth just trying to get them done and then do public comment at the very end.
I'm concerned about public comment at the end for the same reasons I've been all along, that people sometimes want to have their say and then leave.
Yeah, but the public comment, the idea, I guess, is that public comment would be informed by the discussion.
But may I ask a question? Are you thinking like there is also just sometimes the generic public comment that is
That doesn't have anything to do with the
that is
agenda?
not attached to something, right? And I think I hear what Laurel's saying, and that if you do we call the meeting to order, and now we have public comment for
Items not on the
for
agenda.
items that are not on the agenda, we will be going through and we will have this stuff, and then if you wish to comment on any of it, you can comment on that at the end. Then we have the action items, right? Because,
Yeah, if somebody's
yeah,
coming to make a
'cause-
comment on something not on the agenda,
right, and
maybe
they're
just,
like,
they don't
I'm
need
mad
to wait."
about where the the bus stop is.
So you
Yeah.
want
That's
public
not there.
comment at
Yeah.
the front?
Yeah.
Front,
Fine.
yeah. 'Cause
So
then
they
you
can
just
get it
wear
in
out
and-
your public and they get mad at you.
Okay,
Yeah, that makes sense.
that makes sense.
Does that sound,
I agree.
I'm asking Scott, that's all copacetic? I mean, I know technically we are allowed to do it whenever we decide.
Right. The only time that it ever creates a problem is if you've got that issue in the community, and you've got an hour or two of public comment before you can get going with your meeting.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the very rare meetings, so I don't think you should establish a procedure based upon the rare exception.
Do you think it's reasonable to say for these work sessions, we're gonna have public comment for items not on the agenda, and ask them to hold comment for items on that agenda till after the work session,
I
or?
think that's more than reasonable, but, we've certainly been on the board and been the
Yeah.
president long enough to know of those examples that notwithstanding you saying that
Yeah.
there are some people that want to speak anyway.
Mm-hmm. And if it's one or two, it is what it is.
Let it go,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it takes less time to let them go than to argue about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So basically have before and at the end of the work session.
So then I think, I
Gretchen
guess
has
one,
her hand.
oh, sorry, Gretchen.
Well, I just noticed that, I remember we had Colangelo not Linda, but
Gus.
Gus, thank you.
Yes.
He came and observed meetings for a while and then gave us
right.
recommendations. And one of the I'm just saying this is what he said. One of the recommendations is that what we have in this memo as number 4, communications for COG, legislative, superintendent, student rep, he said to put that at the top, which is why it has been
That's
first.
right.
And here, it's 4th.
Yeah, so I guess that could go up above. That's why this is just an example. You know why it's 4th is because we initially didn't even have it on here, and then I was like, oh, we're missing the communications portion. So that can go up here.
That's why it says draft.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, 'cause we wanna-
there's-
Yeah.
There was 2 versions, like some have a work session, a committee of the whole, where it's just discussion. And there's no voting items on there at all. Some have both, where there's work session and there's voting items, so that's why.
Yeah, some people do it as like 2 technically separate meetings. There's a work session, and then you adjourn, and then they have a voting meeting, and they do that. And then, so, yeah, I think you probably had it lower because initially it was thought of as like, it was part of the voting meeting, and so you would have it there, yeah.
So, I guess another question I have then, while we're at it, is if we're going to go this direction, do we want to still start at 7 for these, or do we want to start a little earlier, since I assume we would rarely need a exec session before one of these meetings, because it would be,
There would be no,
we wouldn't be putting action items on that are particularly
although
weighty.
We may have discipline
still
issues
have to
to
do
deal with,
like
yeah.
expulsions.
Personnel.
Pers-
All those things
Personnel.
would require executive session.
So
you
keep it
would
to 7
see-
o'clock.
Yeah, see how many. I would say 7 to 9.
And end at 9.
Yeah, that'll be the day.
See, there you go. Arbitrary.
Baby steps, whatever.
Well,
It can be done.
No, I know.
We have been in a really lovely place in terms of like not having a long period of public comment because we haven't been dealing with anything
And anything.
particularly. Yeah, stressful, so.
Let's do it that way.
Okay. You do that.
Burn whatever sage, light whatever candle you need to make sure that keeps
I
happening.
said, whatever deity you've been praying to, keep praying.
What is it called, smudging, when you burn the sage?
Okay. Okay, so then the next thing is then since we have board reorganization, our next meeting, regular board meeting, that we would want to get your preferences for which area you would like to co-chair. But talk amongst yourselves, since it's like a partnership.
Oh, do we have to do that now?
Yeah.
No, like
Okay.
between now and December 5th.
Wait, so does this mean that everybody has to be a co-chair? So you can't just say, no, thank you?
I mean, you could, but that wouldn't be being a team play.
I put more.
If your partner agrees to be the driver and you're just in the passenger seat, then that's fine between the two of you, but,
Well,
might have
CJ
to
was
step
shaking
up.
his head no the whole time, so.
But I would like that there be 2 board members that met with the administrative liaison.
He's asking nicely.
I was just wondering if it's optional or not. I have the answer. The answer is no.
Right.
Your idea then that the board president is the liaison for this community engagement, and then the board vice president becomes like everybody else as far as the co-chairs? Okay.
And then I think the co-chairs need to communicate with the board president about agendas. I don't want to have to go to every phone call with the administrator. I'm still not quite sure what the board president role, how it shifts or evolves with this, because it's putting more agenda planning in the court of the co-chairs, right? So I guess if the co-chairs can keep the board president in the loop, on.
But we're also going to
We're still
review
gonna
at
have
agenda
board
planning.
leadership, so that, what has been decided will come back to me, and then I would present at the board leadership, and then they would be informed about the various different things.
So like, if two people are working together on each area, it just creates a little bit of, I don't know, like if somebody's out of town, then you've got somebody else there, or.
And it's a double check system, some depth.
And we're gonna need two people who are both co-chairs and serve on the policy committee.
And then some other people to do some of the other,
Then you don't have to do, maybe you don't have to do the IU then, if you don't want to do the IU.
She wants to do the IU.
He likes it company.
That just made my night.
Good at it. Not giving you up.
You don't, like, there's all CACs that you don't have to do, or Ed Foundation that, I don't mind continuing to do that unless somebody else wants it.
You don't have to co-chair policy if you want to be on policy. You can make two other people do it.
Jackie, so.
They're all.
I'm just saying, there are four, if we're having four people on the policy committee, we're gonna need four people on the policy committee.
True.
And I mean, there are
Yes.
two other co-chairs who will also have to be on the policy committee.
Right.
That's all I was saying.
Oh, yeah,
That's
I see.
true.
what you're
That's like
saying.
an
Yes, yes, yes,
additional-
Yes, yes.
And those two people should get a free pass on something else.
Right.
We just have to think about, like, I always try to think
Or at
about
least an extra
balancing
cookie in their
loads
Panera box.
anyways with.
Yeah. Right.
CACs
Yeah, like
and all those.
I originally was on 3 committees this year because Bob felt that leadership should both be part of the demographic, whatever, because we really thought we were going to tackle attendance boundaries. And so then I had less CACs this year because doing 3 committees was weird. And it turns out we didn't even get to any of that stuff. But, so yeah, there's oftentimes try to balance
Yeah.
those.
Okay, and we would definitely reassess in 3 months, and if it's not working, we change.
Like, we'll put it on an agenda to talk about it.
Exactly.
Maybe. Yeah, easy.
We know what that system's like.
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
I just want to reinforce Peter's idea. This is a way to mirror back to us all what we're doing, what works, what doesn't work so well, what opportunities we might recognize or identify through this that we wouldn't otherwise be aware of or alert to, and what things we can push to the curb. I think those were points well presented, and they make sense in terms of giving us a chance to reflect on what we're trying to accomplish here.
I do think this model probably works with, I think our board like ours has like the trust to be able to like divvy up the co-chairs and work effectively. I think if like you had a much more contentious board relationships, it might be harder to do that.
I'm so glad we had this discussion today and not the day I read that email. Which is in here. That's all I have to say about that.
Time is a good thing, sometimes.
For the one additional work session each month that will probably, be held in the daytime, is it going to be like a regular, like a Wednesday, like we're going to see what time works for everybody,
What works
and we'll
best for
say,
everybody.
that day on a Wednesday from 2 to 3, that's when, and so we could all know
Doodle poll
beforehand.
of some sort.
Okay.
And will that then be televised? Because the board meetings, and I
Well,
assume the work
yeah, I
session,
mean,
the
it's,
evening ones are
committees
tomorrow.
are televised, so,
No,
Committees
no,
are
they're
Although we need-
virtual,
that's-
they're virtual.
We would do,
Well,
virtual.
They'll be virtual.
Okay.
So like,
It's a,
We've done
So
other
I-
daytime work sessions that weren't televised. And when we did the work session on SPPA, it wasn't on CNET.
right.
Yeah, I think it depends on what the
What the
meeting is,
topic
what
is.
it has in
What
it
is
and all
top-
that, yeah, and like,
Yeah.
transparency is important, and like, there are planning commission meetings, for example, that they're on CNET.
Yeah.
They're all on CNET, and if we think about this like a planning commission meeting, that provides insight to the public, it's not, I think, gonna up our CNET contract due, right? I mean, I think that's something that,
I don't know what their availability is.
yeah,
That
I
would
think
be a
that,
question
I
to
think that's
answer.
something that should be, I agree, I think it should be on the table for a possibility, but we don't need to make that decision right now. It's something we should come to understand.
evening ones will be,
The evening ones
Has to
will
be.
be.
as we are.
Yeah.
Has to be.
I don't know, I guess we put on there that it would be daytime. I don't know if another Monday night is preferable or not. I'd prefer daytime.
Well, we can hash this out.
Not gonna say. I'm turning around.
Okay.
Just so I don't talk.
Okay.
So do we need a motion to adjourn if we're adjourning?
Yeah, we will. And I would say, I mean, I just want everyone to be, like, if we get into it and you feel like it's not working, I just
And we
think
need to
people-
make sure that it doesn't happen on a COG General Forum evening.
Right,
Okay.
yes. We need to make sure that when we do the board calendar, yeah.
Do you really think 3 months is enough time, though, to allow us to know if it's working or not? Because I think as people get into the routine, then they realize, this isn't bad. 3 months ago, this would have been horrible. You know what I mean? I don't know if 3 months.
Yeah, I don't know if we have to decide in 3 months, but we thought
Okay.
out of
Review.
to encourage your willingness to try, we said we would revisit in 3 months
We
to at
should
least
probably
say, I don't know yet, or you might Peter might come back and say, I hate this is as awful as I thought it would be. You know what I mean?
So we'll just basically
I
kind
Or
of.
maybe he'll come back and say he thinks it's the best thing since sliced bread. I don't know.
I think if we,
Sliced bread's pretty great.
I love bread.
one of the things if certain parts don't work is that
We'll tweak it.
the meeting, the the committee of the whole is too long. And so the idea of a committee of the whole might work if you took out,
Okay.
facilities and grounds, whatever, or finance or whatever. I think that would be probably the discussion when we come in 3 months.
Okay.
So.
And honestly, I mean, I think we've kind of fallen off the wagon with doing this, but I think we should be evaluating how we're doing every few months anyways. All right, is there a motion to, do we need an executive session?
No, we
I need
do
an
not, no.
I'm sorry, I do, so I'm gonna ask for adjourning to an executive session.
Oh, we did that. And I
Yeah, so
second.
moved.
Okay, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, then we are adjourned, and I just want to grab everybody for a minute.
Okay.